Today, we virtually the greatest Srinivasa Ramanujan, whose works are still intriguing, challenging, and inspiring generations of mathematics. Fields medalists, Ramanujan's works have even influenced some Fields Medal winning breakthroughs. Our program, with the permission of our Honorable Vice Chancellor of Netaji Subhas Open University, Professor Subhashankar Sarkar. Behalf of Netaji Subhas Open University, I welcome you all in the 7th Srinivasa Ramanujan Memorial Lecture to be delivered by eminent Indian mathematician Professor Gadadhar Mishra of Indian Statistical Institute, Bangalore. It's a moment of great pride for us to welcome Professor Mishra. I take this rare opportunity to welcome Professor Subhashankar Sarkar, our Honorable Vice Chancellor, who is presiding program. I also welcome respected Professor Kajol De, esteemed Doctor of Science and HOD of the Department of Mathematics. Further, my warm welcome to all directors, HODs, faculty members, staff members, coordinators, our learners, and guests. Netaji Subhas Open University, named after Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose, is the only state open university of West Bengal and was established in 1997. Presently, our university has 6 schools of studies with 21 academic departments. With more than 85 teachers and more than 3,500 counselors, we are catering the need of presently around 5 lakhs learners in West Bengal through our vast network of study centers and regional centers. We offer undergraduate and postgraduate programs in open and distance learning mode and regular PhD programs in various subjects, including mathematics. It's a matter of great honor for us. The university has been awarded A grade by the NAAC. A university has been organizing memory of Srinivasa Ramanujan for some years. 6 such lectures have already been delivered by scholars of great eminence. Today, we are having the 7th lecture in this sequence. To begin with a formal opening in this event, may I request now Sri Kishore Sengupta, our registrar sir, to kindly deliver the welcome address. Over to you, sir.
I have the pleasure to welcome you all present in this online platform meeting in the 7th Srinivasa Ramanujan Memorial Lecture organized by the School of Science of Subhas Open University. Today we have with us Professor Gadadhar Mishra, eminent mathematician of Indian Statistical Institute, Bangalore, who will deliver the lecture titled The Games That Mathematicians Play. All of this lecture program, our beloved Honorable Vice Chancellor of Netaji Subhas Open University, Professor Subhashankar Sarkar. Also, other respected directors of schools, Professor Kajol De, School of Social Science, Professor Atin De, School of Education, Professor Chandan Bosu, School of Social Sciences, Professor Anirban Ghosh, School of Professional Studies, Professor Manon Kumar Mondal, School of Humanities of this university. Also, we have with us Dr. Ashik Kumar Aich, Director of Studies, Director of Study Centers, C.A. Sojindranath Kaur, Finance Officer, Mrs. Rokia Rai, Controller of Examinations Acting, Director Regional Sales and Teaching Faculties of NSU, and all other respected dignitaries of other universities. I would like to say something about our university in short. Netaji Subhash Open University was founded by the government of West Bengal in 1997 to commemorate the birth centenary of Netaji Subhash. Netaji Subhash Open University started its journey from 25th November 1997 from the residence of Sharat Chandra Bose, the elder brother of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, at 1 Woodburn Park, Kolkata 20. The day before yesterday, we celebrated the 25th Foundation Day of our university. After a long journey of 25 years, Netaji Subhash Open University has been accredited Grade A by NAAC in the first cycle in April 2021. It is the first open university in the country that has been awarded such accreditation. NSU is being regulated by both RCI and UGC. Netaji Subhash Open University has 3 regional centers at Kollani, Durgapur, and with 64 learning support centers in different corners of the state. Total registered students is about 4 lakh in both UG and PG programs. We have 15 programs in UG and 13 programs in PG. We have 2 numbers, 7 degrees. We have started PhD in 15 programs under new regulations from 21. This year, we have received from UGC for 3 new PG programs. The programs are MA in Economics, MA in Journalism and Mass Communications, and MA in Special Education. This is all what I wanted to say. And with this, I address you.
Thank you, sir. May I now request Professor Kajol De, Mathematics Department, and the Director of Science of our university for introductory speech. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Vishnish. Netaji Subhash Open University has been holding a memorial lecture in the memory of one of the India's greatest mathematical geniuses, Srinivasa Iyengar Ramanujan, for some years. Srinivasa Ramanujan was born 2nd December 1887 in the then Madras Presidency, presently Tamil Nadu. His father was a clerk in a sari shop. His mother was a housewife and used to sing in a local temple. In Kanga School in Kumbakonam. Just before turning 10, he passed his primary examinations in geography and arithmetic as the district topper. After that, he got formal mathematics when he enrolled into Town High Secondary School. The signs of prodigy had started to reveal in him when he mastered S.L. Loney's book on advanced trigonometry while discovering sophisticated results by himself only at the age of 13. After learning the solution method for cubic equations, he discovered his own way for solving the biquadratic ones at around age of 15 years. At his 16, this prodigal teenager exhaustively studied G.S. Carr's a synopsis of elementary results in containing around 5,000 theorems. On his graduation from school in 1904, he received K. Ranganatha Rao Prize for Mathematics and received a scholarship to study at Government. The following days became very hard for Ramanujan. He was so attracted to the pursuit of mathematics that he lost interest in other subjects, failed in most of them, and eventually lost few years were full of hardship, accompanied by poverty, sickness, struggle for finding job, etc. But through all these rough patches of life, he never lost his motivation towards his self-propelled deep explorations of overwhelming mathematical findings. In 1910, Ramanujan met V. Ramaswamy Iyer, the founder of Indian Mathematical Society. Impressed by the outstanding mathematical findings of Ramanujan, Iyer and his contemporary peers extended their patronage. Ramanujan was able now to secure financial help to continue his research and also got a job of accounting clerk in Madras Port Trust. In 1913, on advice and initiative from his peers, Ramanujan wrote letter and sent some of his results to British mathematician G.H. Hardy in Cambridge. Impressed by his fascinating works on hypergeometric series and continued fractions, Hardy and his colleague J.E. Littlewood invited him to Cambridge. In April 1914, Ramanujan joined Littlewood in Cambridge. Thereon began a wonderful mathematical journey. In March of 1916, Ramanujan was awarded a Bachelor of Arts by Research degree, which is the predecessor of the PhD degree. Part of his work was published in the Proceedings of London Mathematical Society. During his stay in Cambridge, Ramanujan authored and co-authored 30 papers. On 6 December 1917, Ramanujan was elected to the London Mathematical Society. 2 May 1918, he was elected a Fellow of Royal Society just at the age of 31 for his investigation in elliptic functions and the theory of numbers. On 13th October 1918, he was the first Indian to be elected a Fellow of Trinity College, Cambridge. But all were not so well for him. He was diagnosed with tuberculosis and a severe vitamin deficiency. In 1919, he returned to Kumbakolam, and in 1920, he passed away at the age of only 32. Today, about Ramanujan, the famous self-taught Indian mathematician whose mathematical genius will never cease to startle the world and who rose to the height of all-time great mathematician and Jacobi, of course with the never-ending support of his friend, philosopher and guide, Professor G.H. Hardy. It is our great honor to introduce the renowned Professor of Mathematics from Indian Statistical Institute, Bangalore, Professor Godadhar Mishra, as the speaker of the 7th Srinivasa Ramanujan Memorial Lecture organized by Netaji Subhash Open University today. Professor Mishra, known for his remarkable contributions in operator theory and allied fields, is the Fellow and Provost Indian National Science Academy during the period 2018 to 20. He is a recipient of J.C. Bose National Fellowship in 2012 and S.S. Bhatnagar Award in Mathematical Sciences in 2001. The Odisha Bigyan Academy conferred him the Biju Patnaik Award for Scientific Excellence in 2013. Professor Mishra is a Fellow of Indian Academy of Sciences, Bangalore. He was the editor of the journal Proceedings Math Science, Indian Academy of Science from 2005 to 2012. And he is the editor of the Indian Journal of Pure and Applied Mathematics from 2015. Professor Mishra was the head Indian Statistical Institute Bangalore Center from 1997 to 2002. He also served the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore as a professor for a long time. And presently he has moved to Indian Statistical Institute, Bangalore again. We are very fortunate and proud to have such a famous mathematician amongst us, though online, to deliver the 7th Srinivas Ramanujan Memorial Lecture today. And I'm sure that the participants will have a great time hearing Professor Gadadhar Mishra, which may open new avenues of learning and research. I wish the program all the success. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. We all are eagerly waiting for the lecture of Professor Gadadhar Mishra. As we already know, the title of his talk is The Games That Mathematicians Play. This is definitely going to be an exciting session. May I request now Professor Mishra to take over?
Yeah.
Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Dev, for that introduction. I hope I'll be able to live up to some measure of that. Giving a lecture in honor of Ramanujan is a daunting task, to say the least. I am extremely nervous, and I had a great deal of difficulty in choosing a topic that will be perhaps sort of not will be good for an audience who would like to see what sort of mathematics can actually be fun. On several occasions, I have gone around saying that mathematics is fun, which is somehow not really seen as a fun activity by many people, including students and colleagues who practice mathematics. So I have been sort of trying to convey this idea that just because you are doing mathematics, you don't have to put up a frown on your face and be walking around with a cup of coffee and not talk to anybody or not say hello and so on and so forth. So that's why, as I said, although this is the occasion to celebrate the birth centenary of Ramanujan, I have chosen not to talk about mathematics at the at a level where perhaps you could pick up a research theme, because that I thought would be too much, particularly if one is paying respect to Ramanujan. I mean, there is hardly anything that I can really come anywhere close to the kind of insight, the kind of depth and the significance of the mathematics that Ramanujan produced about 100 years ago, or a little over 100 years ago now. I am not aware of anyone who has changed the landscape of mathematics to the extent that Ramanujan managed to do. And in fact, even today, after more or less about 100 years, people are discovering newer and newer sort of insight into the sort of mathematics that Ramanujan actually produced. In fact, on a couple of occasions, similar occasions, I have said, looking at the mathematics of Ramanujan, sometimes against my own convictions, I sort of feel perhaps the stories that he used to tell about goddess so and so coming and telling him that this and that must be true, and he had no role to play, because I begin to feel that might be actually true, partly because when you look at the body of mathematics he has produced, it doesn't appear to be human. Nobody has been able to match, as I said, the depth and the sort of insight that he brought into the research that he was doing at that point of time. So having said all that, let me now sort of try to play little games. These are, I have kind of two games that I want to describe and show you how what starts out to be fun can be translated into a mathematical problem that one then sort of tries to solve on a chalkboard. So let me share my slides now. Let me describe the game. So the 15 puzzle is a game consisting of 4x4 array. It's just a board game. I would like to show you that. I actually bought one. It's easily available. So this is kind of the board game. If you can see, this is easy to buy on Amazon. There are other games of that sort I kind of play with. So it's a 4x4 board game, and it has the numbers written in serial order from 1 to 15. I'll show you a picture just in a minute. The last slot in this 4x4 board is left blank, and the position of 14 and 15 are swapped. So they are interchanged from their natural order. 14 appears where 15 should have been, and 15 appears where 14 should have been. In other words, the natural positions of 14 and 15 are swapped. You can see that here in this board, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 15, 14. This 15 and 14 are swapped. The game is one where you are allowed a certain kind of moves on this board. The moves are described by simply saying that any neighbor of the blank tile can move into that blank tile. Okay, I'll show you what that means. And the puzzle or the game is to put the tiles back in the original order. That is, only 2 tiles are swapped, 15 and 14. You make any number of legal moves that you like, but finally, when you are done, you are supposed to produce the numbers on the or the tiles on this board in its natural order. That is, you have to flip back the position of 14 and 15. And this should be a simple task. That is what people thought in 1880s or so. Sam Lloyd, who made up this game, actually proposed a prize, and the prize money was $1,000. And for that time, $1,000 was a lot of money. And as it turns out, I am not entirely sure whether he realized when he made the puzzle that it cannot be solved, because the poor fellow would have been out of his pocket by a fair amount of money. A number of people could solve it. As it turns out, a couple of years after the puzzle was announced, it was actually proved by a couple of mathematicians. The article appears in American Math Monthly establishing that this puzzle actually cannot be solved. If these are your legal moves, the legal move simply means that you can push a slide neighboring the blank slide into the blank spot. Okay. Using only these legal moves, you cannot switch back 14 to its original position and 15 to its original position. Okay, that swapping is not possible. Now, just for fun, let me show you a little. So now you see, I can shuffle this game like this, and playing the game simply means that I do that, then I do that, and then I do that. Oh, I am doing it in the wrong order. I should do it this way, and then I do it that way. I do it this way. I do it this way. I do it that way. Now you see, at least I have put the 1 back in its original position using what I call legal moves. Okay. Now you can continue doing this until you are finished. And from the jumbled up state, you have to go back to the original state, which is just every number written in its natural order and the blank coming to the very last spot. The blank should be back here, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Okay. So let me now go back to share again my original slides. So I hope the whole point for me was that I wanted to make clear what the game that we are trying to play. Okay. So this is the game. The next agenda that I have is to say that playing this game or finding a solution, this puzzle, that is putting these tiles back in order, is actually a question about the permutation group. So let us discuss just a little bit about the permutation group. So associating a permutation with every state of the puzzle. So a state of the puzzle simply means the numbers put in whatever positions that you choose to put them in. So that actually defines a permutation. But let's just do it systematically. For the purposes of this discussion, we'll think of a permutation, sigma, simply as a self map of the set 1, 2, all the way up to 15, comma star. The star represents the blank slot. The sequence sigma I from this set is often identified with the permutation itself. So if you are given the board with numbers written at various slots, then you can convert it into a permutation. So to turn the grid layout into a sequence or a permutation, you could, for instance, line up the rows next to each other. In other words, read off the number from left to right and top to bottom. Here is the illustration of that. So your grid is given here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 15 and 14 are swapped. And I'm saying it is a permutation. It is a permutation in the sense that it does nothing up to 13. And when it comes to 14, it puts 15 in place of 14. And when it comes to 15, it puts 14 in place of 15. And then the star remains unchanged. So this is exactly what we call a permutation. This permutation in cycle notation or in the notation of transposition can be written simply as 15, 14. That means this notation here, 15, 14 means 15 goes to 14, 14 goes to 15, and nothing else is changed. Okay. So our original configuration of the game, we identify that configuration as just a permutation, and that permutation is nothing but a transposition. Okay, everything is fixed and only 15 and 14 are swapped. Well, let's just give a formal definition of that. A permutation is said to be a transposition if you take I to the position j and put j in the position I, okay, and leave everything else alone. So this is a transposition. That means only two things are interchanged as far as their position is concerned. So if you start with the identity permutation, instead of putting I at the ith position, you put j at the ith position. And instead of putting j at the jth position, you put I at the jth position. Other than that, you leave everything else alone. So that is a transposition. Now, if you apply a transposition, as I said, you look at permutations as self maps. The transposition is also a map on the same set on which you have defined your permutation, and therefore you can compose a permutation with a transposition. And when you do that, you sort of get something like this. You are given some permutation, you follow it up by a transposition. So what are you supposed to do? Well, as long as you are looking at a position which is not either I or j, you leave it alone. So this tau composite sigma will remain itself like what sigma was in the beginning. Nothing will happen to it. But if L is actually equal to I, then you switch the position. You go to sigma j, and if L is equal to if L is equal to j, this is a typo. If L is equal to j, you go to sigma I. Okay? So that's what happens. So you can think of every state of the game. So you allow yourself a certain number of moves, and by making those moves, like I showed you in that website, your board gets jumbled up. But whatever be the jumbled state, you look at these numbers in the corner of the boxes. Here 1 goes to 1, 2 goes to 2, 3 goes to 3, but maybe 7 goes to 8 and 8 goes to 10 and so on and so forth. So if you have managed to create that state, then that state, by remembering that it is actually just a permutation of this 1, 2, 3, 4 up to the star, 13, 14, 15 star, you see that any intermediate state in your game is nothing but a permutation, corresponds to a permutation. The initial state corresponds to the permutation given by just one transposition, as I explained right in the beginning. So this is the initial state, and this initial state we think of as a permutation. Namely, nothing happens until you hit 13, but when you go to 14, in the position 14 you put 15, and in position 15 you put 14, and of course you leave the blank space alone. Now, if you make a legal move, that is, you are allowed, as I said, to move any tile which is neighboring the blank tile. You can push that tile into the blank position. It is, of course, entirely up to you which tile you want to push where. So, in the initial state, this is the initial state, the blank tile is surrounded by 11, 12 and 14. So we can either push 14 to this blank place, then the blank place goes to 15, or we can push the 12 into the blank place, so the blank goes to the position 12, and so on. Here, for the purpose of an example, I have said, suppose you make a legal move. The legal move says that push 12 to the blank position. Well, if you do that, you will get this new configuration. And this new configuration itself corresponds to a permutation. What is the permutation now? Well, up to 11, nothing happens. 12 goes to star. 13 remains as it is. That is why I have not written 13 here. 13 remains as it is. 13 remains as it is. And of course, the 15 and 14 are swapped. Nothing changes there. Okay. Now, following this first legal move, the legal move itself is a permutation. Okay. So this permutation is saying leave everything alone except for the position 12 and star. So the move itself is a permutation, which is in this case a transposition. So every legal move, I want you to remember, is nothing but what is being called as a legal move for the purpose of the game is nothing but a transposition. Not every transposition, but those transpositions that arise or that occur by considering the fact that any tile which is neighboring the blank space can be pushed into that blank space. So that produces a transposition. Okay. So the transformation, which was a legal move in the previous slide, can also be thought of as a permutation, and that permutation is star goes to 12, 12 goes to star. Okay. Star goes to 12, 12 goes to star. If you look at this corner here, then it is 12 which goes to star, and then star comes to 12. It is a transposition here. Now, following our first move by a second legal move, say 12 goes to 11, 11 goes to 12, produces the new state shown below. So before 15 and 14 were swapped, 12 and star interchange their place. Now what are the legal moves available to me? Well, the legal moves that are available to me is that I can push 11 to this place, I can push 8 to this place, or I can push 12 to this place. I have chosen to push 11 to the place of 12, and I have chosen to push 11 back into 12. So you get a new configuration here like this. The main point is, so this move is again another permutation. Okay. The point I want to make is, when you make, so your game state the initial state of the game is a permutation itself. The moves you make are transpositions. So you take one permutation, the initial state is a permutation, your legal move is a transposition, and you can compose the initial state, which was a permutation, by this transposition, follow it up again by a second transposition. It gives you the new state that you are in. The point is that the composition of or one legal move followed by another legal move corresponds to composition of permutations that represent the legal moves. That is what I am trying to demonstrate here. If you look at 12, 11 and star 12, these are the two legal moves you made. But those two legal moves, if you think of them as permutations, their composition is nothing but 11 star 12, and that is the same as applying this composition in one go to 15, 14. But of course, you cannot do this in one go because that is not a legal move. But the point is, legal moves are themselves permutations. Composition of legal moves is exactly, or one legal move followed by another is exactly the composition of the corresponding transpositions. So this way, what happens is you can now say, okay, let me just finish this one slide and then I'll say what I wanted to say. Conversely, given any permutation, so you take any permutation of the set 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 15, followed by the star, you take any permutation. Then that permutation you can convert into a state of the game by assigning positions as I have done here. For example, you take the permutation 10, 11, followed by 1, 2, 3, 4. So what you do is, you know that the position of 10 and 11 are swapped. So you have swapped the positions of 10 and 11, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4 as a cycle. That means 1 goes to 2, 2 goes to 3, 3 goes to 4, 4 goes to 1, this cycle. All the other positions are left alone. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, they are in natural order. 13, 14, 15, and the star are in natural order. So in other words, there is a correspondence between the state of the game, the positions on the board, and permutations in such a way that one legal move followed by another corresponds to composition of permutations. This is what I am trying to say here. Thus, there is a one-to-one correspondence between states of the game and permutations. A legal move corresponds to applying a transposition to a state, or what is the same as a permutation. One move followed by another corresponds to applying transpositions one after the other to give a state to go to a given state to go to a new one. So the 15 puzzle, therefore, amounts to ascertaining if there exists a sequence of admissible transpositions. Remember, not all transpositions are legal moves. That is why I am using the term admissible transpositions. These are the ones that correspond to legal moves. Corresponding to legal moves that will transform the initial permutation with 14 and 15 swap to the identity permutation. Okay? So that is how this fun game or this 15 puzzle gets completely translated into a question about the permutation. Okay. Now, I just wish to spend a little time talking about the permutation group, a couple of slides, and then we'll be again back in the business of saying why this cannot be done. So let us quickly say that every permutation is a product of transpositions. Okay. Every permutation sigma can be obtained from the identity permutation by a sequence of transpositions. This is a neat proof. To prove this, start with the identity permutation and repeat the following steps until the permutation at hand is the one you want to see. Okay. So as you know, the permutations can you can take a permutation and apply transpositions to bring it back to identity, or you can take the identity configuration and apply transpositions to produce any configuration that you want. That is the content of this theorem. So suppose you are starting with the identity permutation and you have done case steps. You have done case steps somehow, and you have up to that point you have what you want. But then at the kth step, you notice that the position I is not where you want it to be. So you know that position I is not where you want it to be. So what you do is you find the position J where what you want is actually sitting. Okay, so you want something to be in the position I. That thing is actually sitting at position J. So what you do is you interchange or swap the positions of I and J. So in this bargain, what will happen is that you would have fixed the position I as you want, and you have not disturbed anything before that position I, because you are at the kth step. Up to I, you have fixed everything. Okay, so this way, if you continue, this fixes up the location I, and in every step you fix at least one position, and you don't mess up anything else that comes before it. And therefore, after n number of steps, using only transpositions, you would have managed to produce exactly the permutation that you want. So every permutation can be written as a product of transposition. So here is an example. So you take a permutation that you want, 3, 4, 2, 1. That means 1 goes to 3, 2 goes to 4, 3 goes to 2, and 4 goes to 1. You want to see how to obtain this permutation as a product of transpositions. So you begin with 1, 2, 3, 4. You see that the first location is where you want 3, but instead it is 1. So what you do is you interchange the position of 1 and 3. So in the second step, what you have is 3, 2, 1 and 4, because remember you have interchanged or swapped 1 and 3. So you get 3, 2, 1, 4. But the second location is now remains messed up. It was messed up before, it remains messed up. So you swap 2 and 4, because that's where you want 4. So if you swap 2 and 4, you'll get 3, 4, 1 and 2. The third location is messed up, so swap 1 and 2 and you get 3, 4, 2, 1. And this is how you will end up getting the permutation that you want, starting from the identity permutation. Now note that this may not be the only way of performing a sequence of transpositions that can morph or that can convert the identity permutation into the given permutation sigma. There might be various ways of doing this. However, one of the main, very, very deep, significant, and somehow something that plays a role in very surprising ways in all kinds of mathematics is that while there are several different ways in which you can write permutation as products of transpositions, it turns out that no matter how you do it, the number of transpositions, if you in one way the number of transpositions is even, in any other way that you produce sigma by writing it as a product of transpositions, it will remain even. You cannot write one permutation in two different ways as products of transpositions, where the number of transpositions in one case is odd, in the other case it is even. That is simply not possible. That is one of the fundamental facts about permutations, and that's the statement about parity. In other words, this partitions, in other words, the fact that every permutation, when written as a product of transpositions, involves either an even number of transpositions or an odd number of transpositions, allows you to think of all permutations as a set of as two sets or two kinds of permutations. One where you need even number of transpositions to express that permutation as a product, and the other set is the set of permutations where you need an odd number of permutations to express the permutation as a product of transposition. What we discussed in the previous slide, saying that the parity is unambiguously defined or determined, that describing the set of all permutations in this way is unambiguous. There are exactly two sets of permutations. One set of permutations is called even permutations and the other set is called odd permutations. In fact, the set of all permutations, which is denoted usually by S sub n, that is a group under the composition, because I have told you permutations are nothing but self maps on a certain set. So if you have n symbols, or if the size, then you get a group which is usually denoted by as S sub n, and it is easy to count, and so that the number of elements in this permutation, in this symmetric group consisting of all permutations of n symbols is factorial n. If you look at the set of permutations which are even, then that is denoted as the group A sub n. It's actually a subgroup of the group symmetric group S sub n. That's A sub n. Now we are more or less ready to actually prove that this puzzle is impossible to solve. We begin by observing that every move in the game is really a transposition behind the scenes. It's not so much behind the scenes. I have already told you that every legal move of the game is actually a transposition in terms of the permutation or moving the permutation. Okay, so the impossibility proof, that's what I want to do now. The permutation corresponding to our target state. The permutation that we want to get, remember I have told you what the initial permutation is. So the initial state of the permutation is where 14 and 15 are swapped. The final state that we want is the state where everything is in its natural order. That means we want 14 and 15 swapped back into their original position. So that means we want to get this string, which is the identity permutation, from that one single transposition, namely 15 goes to 14, 14 goes to 15. All right. So the proof, in terms of the state of the game, notice that the final state has the blank tile at the bottom right corner, just like we had at the start state. So I want to emphasize this whole proof can be understood in terms of, in a way, what the blank tile is doing. Because as I said, when you think of the moves of the game as pushing a tile, which is a neighbor of the blank tile, into the blank position. Okay, so in terms of the blank tile, if you look at the final initial state, in both states the blank tile is at the bottom right corner, which is in terms of the array in the 4-4 position. Okay, this means that in a hypothetical sequence of moves that marks the initial game state, that is where 14 and 15 are swapped, into the solved state, where 15 and 14 are swapped back into their original position, we must have performed. Remember, when you do all this, the blank tile is actually moving. How is the blank tile moving? It is moving either up or down, left or right. So for you to bring it back, starting from somewhere, to the same position, when you start making whatever moves, you are either going up, going left, going right, whatever. But unless the number of left-right moves and the up and down moves cancel each other, you are not going to be able to bring the blank tile back into its original position. Okay, that's something for you to think about and convince yourself. If this is not the case, there is a little explanation here. All this can be written down as a mathematical proof, and in fact, the title of the book that I showed in the very first slide is a book which is being taught by someone right now, or maybe a year ago or something, which is about such things, and there you will find a complete proof, and he has a number of video lectures also, and so on and so forth, which I find very interesting. Okay. So if this is not the case, that is, if the left-right move and up-down moves don't cancel each other completely, then imagine the blank tile traveling through the board as you perform the moves. If the number of times you moved in opposite directions did not exactly cancel, it will be impossible for the blank location to be back at its original location. Okay. So in any winning sequence, that is, if you want to be back after making some number of moves, which presumably has put 14 and 15 back in its natural order, that's what I am calling a winning sequence. So if you have made a number of moves that has switched 14 back to its own position and 15 back to its own position, the number of moves performed must be even, because the right and left and up and down must cancel each other. This implies that the permutation corresponding to the start state in particular cannot be obtained from the identity permutation with an even number of transformations. That makes the starting permutation an even permutation. Another way to look at it kind of pictorially is to say, since the empty space moves around the puzzle, eventually it has to return home. The number of moves must be even. The way you show it is that the empty space must start in the shaded box 16, and after each move, it alternates the colors of the box it is in. And so if it returns to a shaded box, it must have moved an even number of times. So if you examine this picture, you will be able to see that what this picture is doing is the same thing that I described by explaining the moves as going up and down or left and right. And this is again from the same sort of book. So that is the impossibility of the game. So there are a couple of other things that I want to say about this game before we move on to the next one. This shows that every solvable state that places a blank tile at the bottom right corner must correspond to an even permutation. This does not automatically imply that all such states associated with the even permutations are solvable. Please remember that in mathematics, this is kind of very crucial. There are two sides to the question. One is a necessary condition. It is simply saying that if your configuration or if your permutation was solvable, then that permutation must be an even permutation. It does not say that if it is an even permutation, then you can actually solve it. However, the permutation corresponding to the start state that we have been handed out is clearly an odd permutation. It can be obtained from the identity permutation by a transposition of the elements at the 14th and 15th position. So we have established the impossibility of solving the 15th puzzle. But there are a couple of other things. As I said, all of you care about such things. Maybe if you go to the internet, you will find tons and tons of things, lot of variations, lots and lots of variations of this idea. And there are some very, very interesting ones. But let me conclude this part of the talk by simply saying, here is the theorem that you can state. A permutation sigma of the 15 puzzle which fixes the star. Now you could allow for permutations which don't have to fix the star. The initial configuration doesn't have to have the star in the bottom right corner. So a permutation sigma of the 15 puzzle which fixes star is solvable if and only if it is even. That is, sigma is in the alternating group A15. Now, right in the beginning, if your initial state is such that the blank is not at the top bottom corner, at the bottom right corner, then there is another theorem that will answer that question, but it is a little bit more complicated. So I am not going to go into that. And as I said, there are two directions to this theorem. The first is a solvable configuration is an even permutation, and every even permutation is a solvable configuration. So these are two different things. A solvable configuration is an even permutation, and every even permutation is solvable. I have tried to indicate a proof that proof of the first direction, namely that a solvable configuration must be even. But the second depends on the fact that even permutations can be expressed as products of 3 cycles. And again, as I said, it's done in that book. Those of you who are interested, there are a lot of variants. I mean, it's almost like the Rubik's Cube. I mean, after the Rubik's Cube was made available, there are many, many different ways in which people came up with the same idea, but are variations of the idea that is either more difficult or more challenging or less challenging and so on. Okay. So let's go to the next game, which is the unstacking game. Okay. And in this game, what is the game? So you are given n plus 1 bricks stacked one on top of the other. The game is to split them into a set of 2 piles, one of them consisting of n1 bricks and the other consisting of n2 bricks, such that n1 plus n2, of course you are starting with a pile of n plus 1 bricks, so you want to break them into 2 piles, one consisting of n1, the other consisting of n2. So n1 plus n2 must be n plus 1. Suppose n equal to 6, then this first step in the game may look like this. So you have 7 tiles. You had n is equal to 6. So you have 7 tiles. You break them into 5 and 2. Once you do that, you also earn some number of points. The points you earn is exactly the height of the one pile times the height of the other pile. In this case, the first one is 5, the second one is 2. You have split 7 into 5 and 2. So the points you earn for this step is 5 times 2, which is 10. Now you can continue the game by splitting one of the 2 piles again, say the one with 5 bricks, into 2 piles of 4 bricks and 1 brick. Now here is a pictorial representation of what is happening there. The set of 5 bricks becomes 4 and 1. The set of 2 bricks remains as 2. This time you earn 4 times 1 equal to 4 points. The game ends when each pile has only 1 brick left. The number of points you earn is the total of the points you have earned at each step. Now, the goal is that given a n, fix a n, find a strategy to maximize the number of points you can possibly earn. Okay, so this is a game where you have n, somebody gives you n, and you want to be able to say that, well, this is the maximum that you can get. What follows is an example with n equal to 7. So in the beginning, your score is 0 because you have done nothing. The very first step, if you split the tiles of size I mean, the pile of height 8 into 2 piles of height 4 each, then you get 4 times 4, namely 16 points. In the next step, you took the pile of height 4 and you broke it into 2 piles of size 2 each. And therefore you get, again, this is 2, this is 2, 2 times 2 is 4. In the next step, you continue doing like this, keep breaking, and you will keep getting new scores. I suppose that is now clear what you are doing at each step. And finally, when you are done, you have split the entire tall pile of height 8 bricks into this one single row consisting of 1 brick each. The score, if you add up the score, 16 plus 4 plus 4, whatever, you get 28. Now call it question, call it whatever. The big question is, can you do better? I managed to get 28. Is it possible to get something more than 28? Can you do any worse? Can you make it less than 28? At this point, may I ask if anybody is willing to hazard a guess? Do you think you will be able to do better? Do you think you will be able to do worse? So let me then continue. I'm sure some of you have some idea about what you might expect. So you start with a pile of n plus 1 bricks, and here is a strategy to play the game, no matter what is n. So you start with n plus 1, you break it up into 1 and n. So the number of points you earn is n. In the next step, you take now that you have broken the pile into 1 and n, you cannot touch the first pile which has only 1 brick. There is nothing that you can do to that. But you take the n and break it up again into 1 and n minus 1. So then the number of points you earn in the second step is n minus 1. In the third step, again, you have nothing to do with these 2 piles which have become 1 and 1 each. So then you take the pile with n minus 1 bricks in it, and you break it up again into 2 piles. One of them has just 1 brick, the other one has n minus 2 bricks, and therefore the points you earn is n minus 2. And you continue in this manner, and after n steps, we will have nothing to split. The points you would have earned, as you can see from here, is sum of this n plus n minus 1, n minus 2, all the way down to 1. And as all of us know, and as Gauss had discovered hundreds of years ago, this sum is n times n plus 1 divided by 2. And here is really the big surprise. The big surprise is that no matter what strategy is used, the score for the unstacking game with n plus 1 blocks, or rather bricks, is n times n plus 1 by 2. In other words, what I call the big question, can you do better? Can you do any worse? The answer to that is no. You cannot do any better, nor can you do any worse. Okay. This is a very unusual situation. Usually, most people play games to win. The reason I have particularly picked this game, and I personally like it very much, is that this notion of winning, which often I don't know how to say it. I don't like this idea of winning and losing. Somehow I think a lot of our evil in the society is because of this notion of winning and losing. I would much rather be in a world where there is no notion of winning and losing, and this theorem is very close to my heart for that reason. Okay, the proof also demonstrates something else that you may or may not have seen, which is the principle of strong induction. Whereas most of you, I'm sure, have seen induction, but the principle of strong induction says that if Pn is a property that applies to all natural numbers, then to prove that property by strong induction, what you have to do is prove the following. First, prove the base case, P0 is true, and then for any k, if k is a natural number, you assume that P0, P1, Pk are true. You assume that P0, P1 all the way up to Pk are true. Then you prove that Pk plus 1 is true. If you could do this, this is what is called the induction argument or induction hypothesis or the induction step. If you could do this, then for any n in the natural numbers n, Pn is indeed true. You would have proved that. This is called the principle of strong induction. Now, please notice that the difference between the ordinary induction and the strong induction is that if you are doing ordinary induction, you would be only assuming that Pk is true, and then you will be asked to prove Pk plus 1 is true. Here, what we are assuming is not only that Pk is true, but everything before it, Pk minus 1, Pk minus 2, all the way down to P1 is true, including the base case P0. And once you have the stronger hypothesis, even then, with the stronger hypothesis, if you could prove Pk plus 1 is true, then you are done. Pn is actually true for all n. Okay. Now let us see how we can prove our main theorem, namely, no matter what strategy is used, the score for the unstacking game with n plus 1 blocks is n times n plus 1 over 2. So, so what I'm going to do is to set up the strategy for the induction step by taking 1, 2, 3, 4 all the way up to n. But remember, when I'm going all the way up to n, that means I have bricks which are in a pile of size n plus 1. So I'm always playing with bricks whose height is n plus 1. This is something you have to remember, but then I don't want to worry too much about these details because this is something you can do quite easily on your own. So for our base case, we prove P0, that is any strategy for the unstacking game with one block will always yield 0 points. That is what your answer is. The answer is supposed to be n times n plus 1 divided by 2. Here, n is 0 because I have one brick. If I have one brick, then n is 0 because I am always looking at n plus 1. So this is true because the game immediately ends if the only stack has size 1, you earn no points. So all strategies immediately yield 0 points. For the inductive hypothesis, assume that for some n in n, k in n, k lesser or equal to n, Pk holds. This was our induction hypothesis. Pk holds all the way up to n, which means it holds up to n plus 1. No. The induction hypothesis holds all the way up to n, which means our bricks up to height n plus 1, I can assume that I have the correct answer. Under this hypothesis, we have to show that Pn plus 1 is holds, but Pn plus 1 means that I have bricks of height n plus 2. This is what you have to remember. There is a slight, you have to exercise a little bit of care between n plus 1 and n plus 2. But once you have done that, then everything is easy. So since each stack must have at least one brick in it, this means that the k that we are choosing is greater or equal to 0, which means k plus 1 is greater or equal to 1, and k is lesser or equal to n. So that is where we are trying to do this induction. Consequently, we know that for 0 between, for k between 0 and n, and by the inductive hypothesis, we have that the total number of points earned from splitting the stack of k plus 1 blocks down to be down must be k times k plus 1 divided by 2. So what I am doing here is to say that I have n plus 2 bricks, and I am splitting them in any way that I like into 2 blocks, 2 piles. But once I split them into 2 piles, each pile has a height less than n, okay? And because it is less than n, my strong induction hypothesis applies, and these 2 piles, if I split down to just bricks of height 1, then my induction hypothesis will tell me that for the first one, I'll get k times k plus 1 by 2. And similarly, for the second one, which is now n minus k, I'll get n minus k times n minus k plus 1 by 2. This is by my strong induction hypothesis. In one case, I am applying it to n minus k. In the other case, I am applying it to k. Both these values are less or equal to n. Therefore, my induction hypothesis applies. Now, at this stage, let us consider the total score for this game. The initial move, when I split these bricks of height n plus 2, that means n is actually, n plus 1 is the number, n plus 2 is the height, n plus 1 plus 1. So the initial move yields k plus 1 times, because I have split it into k plus 1, n minus k plus 1, okay? So this is exactly a bricks of height n plus 2. And since I have split it into k plus 1 and n minus k plus 1, the number of points I earn is k plus 1 times n minus k plus 1. But the bricks of height k plus 1, now I can reduce it to bricks of height 1, and my induction hypothesis tells me to do that, I will earn k times k plus 1 by 2 points. And I can similarly reduce the pile n minus k plus 1 of this height into bricks of height 1. And while doing that, by my induction hypothesis again, I would have earned these many points, n minus k plus 1 times n minus k divided by 2. So all told, the number of points that I have earned are k plus 1 times n minus k plus 1, that is by just the splitting. And these 2 piles that I have made, for them to go down to 1 piles of height 1 each, I would have to earn so many points by the induction hypothesis. If I add all of these up, then I get n plus 1 times n plus 2 divided by 2, which is what is the answer for the stack of size n plus 2. That is, we assumed the induction hypothesis up to n, that means bricks of height n plus 1, and we have proved that n plus 1 is true. N plus 1 is true, meaning bricks of height n plus 2. That is what we have to do. And that the answer, according to our guess or conjecture or whatever, was supposed to be n plus 1 times n plus 2 divided by 2, which is what we have got by adding these 3 things. The inductive step is therefore verified, completing the proof. So to repeat, I am saying this is a very, very interesting theorem that says no matter what you do, no matter what strategy you use, the score for the unstacking game will always be n plus the score for the unstacking game with n plus 1 blocks is always going to be n times n plus 1 divided by 2, no more, no less. I would like to be in a world where this happens more often than not. So thank you very much. I stop here. Okay.
Thank you very much for your enlightening and enchanting speech. This has given us a wonderful exposure and a fascinating insight to this exciting topic. May I now request Professor Shubhashankar Sarkar, the Honorable Vice Chancellor of our university, to deliver the presidential address. Over to you, sir.
Though I did not understand it fully, nonetheless, I can read it out from the face of the persons who have attended this particular lecture, and to some extent my intuition also, that we have come to the end of a very engrossing 7th Ramanujan Memorial Lecture organized by the School of Sciences, Netaji Subhash Bose University. Today's speaker was Professor Gadadhar Mishra, a very much famed mathematician of our country. Today's topic, the games that mathematicians play, has been quite thought-provoking. 6 previous esteemed speakers of this lecture series, as has been already told, were late Professor C.S. Seshadri, and then Dr. Bhalchandra Mugankar, if I am correct, and then of Planning Commission, then Professor R. Sridharan of Chennai Mathematical Institute, Professor S.P. Mukherjee of Calcutta University, Professor Shankar Kumar Pal of ISI Kolkata, and Professor Rahul Mukherjee of IIM Kolkata. Professor Gadadhar Mishra actually needs no special introduction. He is widely known for his remarkable contributions in operator theory and allied fields. He hails from Bhubaneswar, which is in our neighboring state of Odisha. After obtaining his graduate degree from Utkal University in 1977 and MSc in mathematics from Sambalpur University in 1979, he did his doctoral work at SANI at Stony Brook. His doctoral work was on curvature, inequalities, and extremal properties of bundle shapes. He started his teaching career at the University of Georgia, Athens from 1982 to 84. He served University of California, Irvine during 1984 and 1985. In India, he has served at prestigious institutes, namely ISI Bangalore and then IISc Bangalore. Presently, as I am told, Professor Mishra has moved back to Indian Statistical Institute, Bangalore. And maybe he is associated now with both these institutes also. In his illustrious career, he has worked with numerous stalwarts in national and international arena. Besides his eminent research career, Professor Mishra was the head of Indian Statistical Institute, Bangalore. And now he is the editor. Besides this, he is also editor of Indian Journal of Pure and Applied Mathematics from 2015. Professor Mishra has been recipient of numerous accolades such as Fellowship of Indian Academy of Sciences, S.S. Bhatnagar Award in 2001, and in 2008 he received the J.C. Bose National Fellowship, and in 2012 he became the Fellow of National Academy of Sciences. The Odisha Vigyan Academy conferred him the Biju Patnaik Award for Scientific Excellence in 2013. At the end, I extend my sincere gratitude and thanks to Professor Gadadhar Mishra for being with us today and presenting this lecture in spite of his very hectic schedule. Professor Kajal De and her team at the School of Sciences, Netaji Subhash Open University, deserve a big applause for arranging such an event. I also extend my thanks to all in the audience today. Thank you all. Namaskar.
Thank you, sir, for your speech. It's a matter of great honor and pleasure for us to have you at the helm of our university. Now, as we are moving towards the conclusion, may I request now Mr. Chandan Kumar Mondal, Assistant Professor of Mathematics, for the vote of thanks.
Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Shubhashankar Sarkar, President of this 7th Srinivasa Ramanujan Memorial Lecture, respected Sri Kishore Sengupta, Registrar of NSU, and respected Professor Kajol Dev, Director of School of Sciences, NSU, and our most valued invited participants. It's my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion. On behalf of the Netaji Subhash Open University and the entire organizing committee of this 7th Srinivasa Ramanujan lecture, first of all, I would like to give my hearty vote of thanks to our distinguished speaker, Professor Gadadhar Mishra, for delivering such an inspiring and informative talks in mathematics. Mathematics is always considered to be a tough and fearsome subject. Most of the time, numerous abstract mathematical notions baffle us and urge us to think about what mathematicians actually do. In this lecture, Professor Gadadhar Mishra very efficiently has explored the abstract idea through a mathematical game. We once again express our gratitude to Professor Gadadhar Mishra for such an excellent lecture. Thank you, sir. Now, I would like to thank our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Shubhashankar Sarkar, for providing the permission to organize this memorial lecture and presiding over the program. Without his guidance, it was impossible to arrange this memorial lecture. I want to express my sincere gratitude to our registrar and finance officer for their valuable suggestion and guidance. I would also thank our beloved director of School of Sciences, Professor Kajol Dev, for her meticulous planning, excellent guidance for organizing this memorial lecture. I take this opportunity to thank the technical support team for their support. I would like to thank all the officers and staff of our university for their support of this memorial lecture. I would like to thank all the directors of all the academic schools of studies for encouragement and cooperation. Finally, I thank my colleagues, Professor Ratnesh Mishra, Dr. Nimai Chandra Da, Dr. Usni Sarkar, and all our faculty members for their cooperation in making this seminar a resounding success. Last but not least, I would like to thank all our participants for this memorial lecture. Thank you so much for your cooperation. Thank you so much.